And it reads, "And let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those of the household of faith." And the second scripture is Colossians 3, verse 17. It says, "And whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him." I have a somewhat rhetorical question to present today, but it's also a personal question. The question is, are you making a difference? Are you making a difference? In life, whatever you do for yourself, very few people will remember. What you do for others, very few people will forget. A year or so ago, I was in South Africa, and I was walking through the mall in Mandela Square. And as I was walking through the mall, this gentleman began following me and my wife. And, I looked back and I was like, why is this guy following me? And then I walked a little further, and then he came up close to me and tapped me on the shoulder. And so I turned around and I said, can I help you? So he said, are you who I think you are? So I said, well, who do you think I am? He said, are you Dave Burrows? I said, yeah, I'm Dave Burrows. I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do you know who I am in South Africa? And he said to me, I watch you on YouTube. And he said, your story had a great impact on my life. He said, I was a drug dealer. I was on the street. And I was involved in a lot of things. And he said, I heard your story. And it impacted me. And he said, today, I'm an entrepreneur. And I have a program to help young men from the streets. And I thought about it for a moment, and I said, man, I'm making a difference. And as I think about life and as I think about all of us in the future, what do you want to be remembered for? Do you want to be remembered for what you did for yourself? Or do you want to be remembered for making a difference? I pray today that all of us would think about and have it as a goal in life to be one of those persons who makes a difference. Amen? Amen. Let's bow our heads together. Father God, we thank you for this day. Lord, we thank you once again that we are able to come into this place to discuss the business of the country, and to deliberate. And Father, we thank you as usual for guiding us, giving us wisdom by your Holy Spirit to make decisions that are in the best interest of all concerned. And at the end of the day, my prayer today is that whatever we do, that we would be one of those persons and those people who make a difference in the world. And we thank you for these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Our Father,
Art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Carlton Bole, Frankie Campbell, Shannon Cartwright, Shipman, Jasper Cooper, Josie Eichler, Marvin Bain, Philip Davis, Janelle Ferguson, Jamal Pereira, Tycho Forbes, Michael Folks, Adrian Gibson, Glennis Hannah Martin, Darren Kinfield, Mark Hume, Ellsworth Johnson, Hank Johnson, Aaron Lewis, Jeff Lloyd, Ricky Matthews, Fred McElpine, Juan Miller, Dr. Cupid Minnis, Letitia Parker Edgecombe, Michael Sintard, Ruben Ramming, Miriam Repley Emmanuel, Travis Robinson, Anisha Rose, Renzo Rose, Dr. Greensand, Donald Saunders, Brent Simonet, Peter Turnquist, Glenwood Wells.
Good morning, honorable members. Honorable members, the chaplain raised, I think, a very fundamental issue this morning with respect to making a difference. And I want to assure this Parliament and the Bahamian people that I am convinced and satisfied that all members of this honorable house are here to make a difference. I believe that in making a difference, we should commit ourselves to always function in a way that we become role models in our society. It is the intention of this presiding officer to make a difference when it comes to the functioning of the legislative branch of government. It is the intention of this presiding officer to function in accordance with the mandate given by the Constitution and by the rules of procedure of this House. I understand that some people, particularly in the media, are suggesting that there might be a contrary purpose of this presiding officer. But I want to assure all members of this House, as well as the general public, that there is no personal vendetta by this presiding officer against the majority party or against the minority party. In fact, this presiding officer is of the view that he needs the support of both the majority and the minority and my advocacy for the independence of the Parliament. I don't know who did that. Honorable member, you can take your seat. Of course, members, we know that the legislative branch of the government has three basic functions. It has a representative function in that it is the only branch of the government where every single citizen of this Commonwealth is represented. It has a legislative function in that this is the only institution that can pass laws, amend laws, and repeal laws. And it has an oversight function given by Article 72 of the Constitution to hold the executive branch of government to account for its stewardship of the people's money and the people's assets. That is the fundamental role and function of the legislative branch. Whenever the rules are silent or are ambiguous, the Speaker has an option to either examine parliamentary practice by Erskine May, consider the standards and practice in the House of Commons, or make an interpretation based on experience and advice from the clerk, principally. And so I want to assure all members that this Speaker has no intention to open a circumstance in this Parliament where it appears that the Speaker is functioning for the benefit of one particular party against another particular party. My intention is to hold you members to the rules of procedure, to the constitutional function, to maintain the proper decorum in this Parliament, and to move ahead. I have friends on both sides of the aisle. I have a best friend in the member for South Beach, and a good friend in the member for Mangrove Key, South and Central Andros. And hopefully, when we all depart this place, I would have good friendship as associates of all of you members of this House. And so, that is my assurance. I guess that is the surprise that the media was speaking about, because this Speaker is committed, a committed patriot to the advancement and development of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marathon.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. 1. The Forestry Declaration of Protected Trees Order 2021.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marathon.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. And I consider myself your friend, even though you didn't mention me, but beg leave to lay on the floor Forestry Amendment Regulations 2021.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up. Honorable member for Marathon, let me just put on the record that I consider you my very good friend as well. As a matter of fact, my senior at the bar, who took me under his wings and taught me the ins and outs of criminal law. So, honorable member, my apologies. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Carmichael.
I think I'm almost afraid to ask now. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Emergency COVID-19 Pandemic Risk Management Amendment Number 5, Order 2021. What this does, Mr. Speaker, two things that this does. First is that we know that Haiti had a carnival. We're very, very concerned about that. And so there's certain travel prohibitions that the government is taking to protect the Haitian people. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the Prime Minister had indicated he would extend provide more time in Grand Bahama with respect to the curfew. And so the curfew hours are now going to be from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. because we have confidence that the Bahamian people are going to continue to act in a mature fashion that we anticipate we all will act in this pandemic.
Order that the document be brought up.
I just Grand Bahama.
Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Health Services COVID-19 Aid for Loss or Injury Rules 2021. And Mr. Speaker, these are the regulations that we will be laying that is going to help lead the charge in regards to our procurement of the vaccine for COVID-19.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Price Control General Amendment Regulations 2021.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further laying of documents.
Statements and communications by ministers. Chair recognizes. Thank you. Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petition. Presentation of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marathon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to have read for the second time and debated the Biological Resources and Traditional Knowledge Bill 2021. Mr. Speaker, the last time I was in this honorable house, I mentioned how we as a nation have been exploring for oil since, I believe, 1947. I mentioned how after the Second World War, exploration began in earnest. Since that time, we have installed 6 exploratory wells in our country. To date, we've yet to find oil in commercial quantities. However, upon coming to office, I met an existing arrangement in place between the government of the Bahamas and the Bahamas Petroleum Company, BPC, or corporation, I think it's company. I meant that in place. And there was a lot of talk about that. We got an opinion from our lawyers because upon coming to office, we made the statement that we were opposed to offshore oil exploration. We immediately started looking at this, and we dispatched a letter to that effect, but our lawyers advised us that the potential liability was far greater and that we were essentially on the hook. That's what that means, on the hook legally. And this liability extends to our credit rating, would have affected our credit rating, our ability to borrow our funds. And it forced us to take a comparative look because there was a lot of speculation on whether or not we were getting adequate returns if we were to find oil. I don't know if you remember that. There was a lively discussion about it. I think some people were kind of prematurely counting their chickens before they hatched. So it caused us to take a further look at this. And what I have here is an international benchmark of stake cake comparison. Hold that right up there. And what this is a chart. On this chart, it shows, sorry. I can see it. You put it right there. This chart shows the respective oil stake per country. And if you look, this is the Bahamas down here, right? Right here. The smallest one, the lowest. Bangladesh being by far the highest. And what does this mean? And I'm glad, I'm hoping they'll come and clarify, but what does this mean? This means that we were bound and obligated by a pre-existing arrangement, arrangement that we met in place that was perhaps one of the worst arrangements in the history of oil exploration. And here's why I say it. Because I showed you the chart. They have us at the lowest. We're not the average. We're not in the middle. We're not in the medium. We're not in the mean. We're the lowest. We were the lowest. Now, it's well known where this legal entity was incorporated. But I don't think that's neither here nor there. I think the thrust of the argument is that these are our natural resources, whether they consist of aragonite or oil, and we ought to get the best deal for it. And I say that that deal was so horrible that it prompted officials from the oil exploration company to say publicly that they'd be willing to re-examine or renegotiate or take a second look. I mean, that's how bad it was. And so I say, right, that what we're about to do this morning, today, and debate this bill, is to prevent that kind of thing from happening ever again. After all, today, even though we may know where the company was incorporated, we sure don't know who all the shareholders are, right? We don't know. So what I'm saying is that you would have watched, certainly myself and my colleagues, come to this honorable house over the years and systematically build and create a legislative framework to govern our environment and our natural resources, systematically. And so this act that we debate this morning, the Biological Resources and Traditional Knowledge Bill 2021, is a continuation of this rich tradition that we have established since coming to office. It's a continuation of that. One of the reasons why it is so important to put in the legal framework is to prevent different people and different companies and different groups with different connections or different associations or relationships from having to meet different criteria for the very same project, right? That's a kind of victimization. And we are opposed to that. I certainly am. But if you remember, we came here, I stood in this honorable house, we tabled and passed unanimously the Ministry of Environment Act, the Environmental Planning and Protection Act, the Bahamas Protected Areas Trust Fund Amendment Act, the Bahamas National Trusts Act, the Control of Plastic Pollution Act, the Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations. No, we ain't finished. And we just tabled this morning the Forestry Declaration of Protected Trees Order 2021. And what does that do? Yeah, these are natural resources. These are our plant natural resources. This is our flora, right? These are our plants. What it does is further expands and broadens the range and scope of trees that are protected, particularly those that are of traditional use in our family of islands. The second order that we tabled this morning was the Forestry Amendment Regulations 2021, right? So if I'm not, and I know the member for Centerville is doing a tally, so if I'm not mistaken, that should be what, 8 that I called? No, you don't want to give any kind of free accounting advice to me. I don't mind. You're still my brother, right? But I do believe that's 8. That's 8, where none existed before. So when they talk about what's been happening in the environment, I tell them, look at the landfill. Or what's been happening in the environment? I say, go at Clifton Pier. Go at Clifton Pier and take a look. This piece of legislation that we will debate, and I'm sure, notwithstanding what anyone says or has to say on their feet in their speeches in terms of the content, because I anticipate many will use this opportunity to talk about anything else but the subject matter in the bill at hand. However, do not be deceived, my fellow Bahamians. This particular act is perhaps one of the most significant pieces of legislation that we will ever table in the House to govern our natural resources. You see, Mr. Speaker, the rich marine biodiversity of the Bahamas is really of great economic value. Besides the value for food, and of course tourism in terms of recreational use, certain species have been recognized to have value to the medicinal and pharmaceutical industry. And over the past decades, the waters of our country have been subject to a type of plundering by researchers engaged in what is termed bioprospecting to extract various resources found in our country. One very critical and important example of this that I'd like to bring to the fore for of public attention is a species by the name of Antilogoria elizabethae, commonly known as the sea whip. The sea whip. This species is of significant economic potential and importance. Sea whip extractions consist of powerful healing ingredients. It's been found to have great medicinal and cosmetic benefits. The chemicals found in sea whip, as a matter of fact, are known to heal skin irritations due to sunburn, slow down the aging process, and reduce pain and swelling from acne. It also has anti-inflammatory, as the member hinted at, for Bamboo Town, and healing capabilities. It is essentially the fountain of youth. Historically, we continue to face the challenge of addressing unlawful harvesting of our biodiversity, given the vast, and I emphasize, vast expanse of our territorial waters, particularly when we take into account and take into consideration the existing enforcement capacity. One problem that is of increasing concern to our country is the unlawful harvesting of samples of marine life for both research and commercial purposes. Because of a lack of functioning national laws and a lack of institutional framework to better enable the Bahamas to effectively implement the provisions and the obligations set out in the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. The current regulatory and institutional setting does not serve us. Thus, we are unable to harness the potential value of our genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge. There is an absence of both a systematic information management system and little coordination between agencies. This is what we met. Further, many of our existing institutions, which actually issue permits, do not have sufficient resources to actually monitor the permits that they issue. Virtually no institutions receive monetary benefits from research conducted in our country. Virtually none institutions receive monetary benefits from research conducted in our country. Further, the fee structure for permits is very low and often free. There is no question, certainly no question in my mind, that the Bahamas is a hotbed for researchers. We have no comprehensive permitting process, no clear management process for research. More so, and this is why we are here today, and I believe every single member in this honorable house, both present and absent, would agree with this. There are no laws to ensure a fair and equitable trade and benefit for our country, for the genetic resources that we all own as a part of the public trust. Why? Because the laws simply don't exist. And this morning, at this moment, we're about to change that. So I look forward to the members opposite, particularly Exuma and Cat Island and Engliston. I look forward to listening to their contributions on the importance of this legislation and how it closes an existing loophole. Because when the government recognized the rising number of requests to access the genetic resources found in the Bahamas for research and development use, particularly in our marine waters, and especially San Salvador. And I don't mean San Salvador, which is now known as Cat Island, where my mother was born. I mean the one formerly known as Watlin's Island. But I was prompted to enforce an 18-month moratorium on the issuance of research and scientific permits, and I don't regret it. And that moratorium was to prevent international agencies from conducting research in the Bahamas, and it was for a period of 18 months. And my colleagues readily agreed, because we had to stop the hemorrhaging of our genetic resources and put the regulations and laws in place. That moratorium started in May 2019 and lasted until November 2020. But it's important to note that this was not a ban on scientific research in the country, but this only impacted permit applications which sought to export our genetic resources for the identified period. The 18-month moratorium on research was put in place to limit the unlawful extraction of genetic resources, our genetic resources from our country. This moratorium remains and will remain in effect until the gazetting of this piece of legislation. Why? Because it is important that we have legal certainty as to the outcome and to the benefit to all Bahamians of whatever biological resources that we have. And to assist the government and my people, the Global Environment Facility, in partnership with the United Nations Environment Program and the Department of Environmental Planning and Protection, which we created by passing the Environmental Planning and Protection Act, implemented a project intended to ensure that the economic benefits, the money derived from the use of our biodiversity and genetic resources, our sacred patrimony and the patrimony of all Bahamians are shared and shared equitably with the country from which the resources are found. And that's our country. All that means is that we want to benefit from our genetic resources to build our country and to build our citizens. The project, Strengthening Access and Benefit Sharing, ABS for short, in the Bahamas, opened an avenue for us to better regulate and manage the use of our genetic resources, particularly those genetic resources that have commercial applications. Because we know that research companies and scientific companies have found in our genetic resources what they believe to be the beginning of a cure for cancer. So as a result of this project, we can become finally a party to the Nagoya Protocol, which is an international agreement under the Convention on Biological Diversity. And this aims at sharing the benefits arising from the utilization of our genetic resources, and those benefits are to be shared in a fair and equal way. The Nagoya Protocol sets out obligations for its contracting parties to take measures in relation to access to genetic resources, benefit sharing, and compliance. Thus, we created a transparent and clear legal framework for access which obliges user countries to provide measures that would ensure that our genetic resources will only be used in accordance with our laws. The protocol opens the way for more economic activity, obviously, but regulated. It improves access to quality genetic samples of our resources that we control, and it maximizes research and development opportunities on genetic resources, because that's where the discoveries are going to come from. By passing this act, and this is an historic act, the national approach with regard to decision-making processes, particularly in this area, are clear and agreed upon. Policy options and the criteria for evaluating them are defined, and information provided on the consequences of alternative options are adequate. The Biological Resources and Traditional Knowledge Act 2021 will regulate access to biological resources and associated traditional knowledge. It will provide the means to ensure sustainable use of our genetic resources, our natural resources, our resources, while prohibiting unlawful genetic and bioprospecting. The Act also secures for us a fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the use of our biological resources, traditional knowledge, and establishes the necessary, very necessary, administrative structures and processes for the implementation and enforcement that will come after the passage of this act. This act is a milestone. I've said it before. It's historic. We are the first in the wider Caribbean, the first to pass such an enabling legislation. So what we're saying to the world is that these are our resources and we deserve to benefit from them. What we're saying to the rest of the Caribbean is that please follow our lead in this regard. Because this act will create a permitting system which is organized and systematic. We will have a coordinating mechanism, and we now have it in place, that coordinates various research permitting institutions like the Department of Marine Resources, Department of Agriculture, Bahamas National Trust, Forestry Unit, the Antiquities and Monuments Corporation, and with the lead of the Department of Environmental Planning and Protection. The purpose for this collaboration is to harmonize all research permitting related mandates and create a single and centralized permitting lane in terms of process and procedures. The permitting system is now fully developed and will be launched as soon as this act is gazetted. Across all aspects of the project that resulted in the creation of this act that we've worked so hard on for years, there was contribution to the strengthening of the national capacities through awareness raising and training workshops. Community engagement exercises and activities were conducted to educate and train family islanders, family island administrators, government officials, members of the public, and to bring them up to speed, so to speak, on the ABS project. The Department of Environmental Planning and Protection also led the initiative, and I want to congratulate them at this point for taking the lead on radio and television, utilizing prominent media platforms, all the social media, Facebook, Twitter, public service announcements. And as a result, we now have an access and benefit sharing system that we can be proud of. And make no mistake, the investment that we're putting in this on the front end is expected to derive huge returns on the back end. Finally, as we may all be aware, biodiversity is the basis of our nation's wealth. We have neither gold, nor silver, nor oil to mine. Instead, the Bahamas has what the world yearns for. Former Ambassador to the Environment, Her Excellency Lynn P. Poloesco, whose contribution to the foundation of the environmental movement in this country is well known and well established. I think she said it best, and I quote her. "We are a beautiful land, scattered like 700 pearls in an emerald sea, capped with startling clear blue skies, bathed in sunshine and moonlight, year-round," end quote. But behind it all, behind all of this, lies the promise for a cure for cancer, the promise for a cure for AIDS and other health benefits. The Bahamas stands alone, we stand alone with the hidden information of future benefits that we can all access. And what this act will ensure, Mr. Speaker, is that the Bahamian people are not left wanting at their own table while their genetic resources are being eaten by others. Marathon supports this.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is an honor and a privilege to have this opportunity to once again be in this place representing the wonderful people of Grand Bahama in general, but Marco City in particular, and to express my gratitude for providing me with a mandate to be a part of your voice to raise the concerns that matter to you. Mr. Speaker, colleagues, permit me to extend condolences to several families. It has been an extremely difficult time throughout the country, but certainly in Grand Bahama, it seemed as if an unprecedented number of funerals over the last year in particular. Mr. Speaker, I want to send condolences to all of those families throughout the country that grieve during these difficult times. The family of Lucinda Sutherland, Joseph Hamilton, William Newbold, Akman Pierre, and just this past Saturday, attended the funeral of Charles and Patricia Sweeting. Just such a beautiful love story where the husband, outstanding Christian man from the Brethren faith, passed. Just a few hours later, his bride, I believe they spent some 70 years together, went home the same day to join him in glory. Incredible, incredible story, incredible family. And someone, Joseph Hamilton, so dear to so many of us in Marco City, 3 weeks in a row, laid to rest other relatives of his, including Floyd, and Joseph just recently passed. And so to all the families, to let you know you're in our thoughts and our prayers, and we believe that God will provide peace and comfort, even in circumstances where we cannot contemplate the reason why. Mr. Speaker, it is indeed an honor to support the bill before us. The Biological Resources and Traditional Knowledge Bill is an important, groundbreaking legislation, and it is a continuum of the incredible work being done by Minister Ferrer and his entire team and the various government ministries, in particular marine resources, agriculture, that continue to collaborate with them. Mr. Speaker, this is important because we are seeking to protect the resources of the Bahamas for Bahamians, not just today, but for children yet unborn. And we should be unapologetic for seeking to protect the resources of the Bahamas, first and foremost for Bahamians, because we know by extension our resources, when managed properly, harvested properly, and properly utilized or exploited, will benefit the wider region and the global community. But as a priority, we have an obligation to protect it for Bahamians. And this is precisely why we were unapologetic in passing the fisheries bill and seeking to make the case that first and foremost, Bahamians ought to benefit from it. We deserve no less. Mr. Speaker, I live in a community where on occasion, for many, many years, straddling both administrations, Bahamians would stand on the lines and watch 6 tellers occupied by others from halfway around the world, cashing checks, wiring funds, while many of them were joining lines in order to go through customer service to get a loan. Mr. Speaker, we are as talented as anyone else, anywhere else in the world. And while in school, we often tutored people from around the world, but it appears to me that something must have happened to us on the plane ride or the boat ride home, because many of those very persons we tutored from around the world seem to have landed lucrative contracts in the Bahamas to be our advisors on how we ought to develop. Mr. Speaker, I'm not making the point that we ought not benefit from the knowledge of our brothers and sisters around the world, but what I am saying that we ought to be front and center, the chief architects of our own development, and others must come in on the terms that we define. And so, Mr. Speaker, this bill seeks to accomplish that. See, it's one thing to say it. In Jankunu, there is a saying, don't just sing it, bring it. And so, Mr. Speaker, what I wish to share with my brothers and sisters at home is it is one thing to stand on a platform and talk about natural resources without specific recommendations and course of action that make those resources beneficial to the Bahamian community, because anyone can talk, and Bahamians have the gift of doing just that. And there are some whose motive is to be in the place where they can get some things done, and their pathway is to give a distinct impression that they clearly understand all of these issues, though even in personal circumstances, they cannot demonstrate ability to be empowered themselves. Mr. Speaker, we ought to be honest with our people. This is their patrimony. The resources of this country does in fact belong to them. they ought to be first in terms of beneficiaries. But there is some hard work we have to do as a people. This business of folks selling a lie that you will be home and have to do very little work and receive a royalty check at the end of the day is a disservice to the industry that we are capable of delivering as a people. It's hard work. Hard work means putting in place the legislative framework that would allow us to benefit from our natural resources. Today, this bill seeks to accomplish that. The hard work is to do the necessary research to determine whether those companies that have had a free ride at 5 for decades in the Bahamas should continue to benefit from licenses and agreements that they have gotten in the past. And so today, I stand in solidarity with all Bahamians who wish to see us front and center of our development. So as my brother, the member for Golden Isles would say, we want to make that wealth more common. Mr. Speaker, there's a general movement in this country, and it is not a new movement, it's an old movement that has gained momentum, where Bahamians want to ensure that those things that we have created, those things that define who we are as a people, accrue benefit to us. That's precisely why Dr. Nicolette Bethel, Patricia Glinton McCollis, Jackson and Stan Burnside and Palm and others have worked tirelessly to ensure that those cultural ways, those things that distinctly define who we are, our people, are protected internationally. And that's why we work with UNESCO to ensure that culturally we protect things Bahamian for future generations unborn, and that our culture is not appropriated by others. That's why we oppose Carnival being centralized as the chief expression of Bahamian culture, and that the bulk of the money should go to our folk ways, our cultural ways, because we believe that anything else is an appropriation of somebody else's culture, and no matter how good we are at it, at best we are an imitation of their culture. In the same spirit, this bill seeks to protect the natural resources of the Bahamas that exceed the usual suspects that we talk about in aragonite or oil. In fact, I mentioned in the introduction of the fisheries bill, Mr. Speaker, that as you look at the development of the blue economy, that we engage in spatial planning to determine how we are going to use the blue economy to do some transformative things in the Bahamas. It is, when we talk about our marine environment, we're talking about a space that is shared by Ministry of Tourism, by Ministry of Transport, Ministry for the Environment, Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources. Spatial planning, which we are now engaged in along with several multilateral organizations, is designed for us to look 5, 10, 30 years into the future and determine how we are going to use this shared space in a way that's beneficial to all concerned. Oil drilling, in my view, works against the kinds of initiatives that we are seeking to put in place in marine resources, in the Department of the Environment, in tourism, in Ministry of Transport. We have not yet fully done evaluation on the range of resources that we have available, and therefore we run a serious risk of damaging billions of dollars worth of resources by selling our souls on the altar of one resource, oil. Mr. Speaker, this bill seeks to conclude the work that started many years ago. Many persons would not be aware that one of the reasons the conference where various scholars and researchers in the Bahamas, particularly those that went to San Salvador, convened every year to share their results is because Bahamian intellectuals, persons in the academic community, and others recognized that persons were doing research, going back to their respective countries, signing lucrative agreements, whether they were professors or they worked for a private company, and benefiting from natural resources of the Bahamas. So that was a step in the right direction. Hold a conference, have them share their research, create greater awareness, but it didn't go far enough. Because what we needed was a framework where that information would first be accessed, we would be able to determine how that information is extracted and utilized and who would benefit as a result of the research. And so, Mr. Speaker, it is one thing to talk about what is possible for the Bahamian people. It's another thing to put your shoulder to the wheel and do the work. Today, this bill represents that work. Mr. Speaker, the Biological Resources and Traditional Knowledge Bill will play a major role in changing wealth creation in the Bahamas and to ensure that this wealth is accrued to Bahamians. One of the things it will do is assist us in carrying out the necessary valuation on a wide range of resources, both flora and fauna, microbial and otherwise, to determine what exists in what quantities and what is the appropriate management plan for each species, each category of resources. Mr. Speaker, as mentioned by my colleague, the member from Marathon, bioprospecting means exploratory activities, including surveying, collection, characterization, creating an inventory, taxonomic identification, bioassay, and of course, genetic sequencing, all aimed to identify genetic resources and information associated with traditional knowledge. Mr. Speaker, there's some things we do in this country that others would gladly appropriate, duplicate, replicate in their country and are paid for it without properly crediting or paying dues to the place and persons from whom they got it. That's precisely why the government is working assiduously to ensure that we protect the cascarilla industry in the southern Bahamas. That's precisely why the Prime Minister has said on more than one occasion he will make the necessary land available to the cooperative in the southern Bahamas to make sure that they are able to cultivate and sustainably harvest cascarilla, to protect the traditional ways in which it is prepared, and to ensure that rather than us just being producers of the raw material, we are able to refine it and extract the products from it so that we can get higher value for our labor. Mr. Speaker, this is about protecting resources. And so I encourage my brothers and sisters, don't let people sell you a dream that they themselves cannot realize otherwise. Pay attention to the work that is being done. Mr. Speaker, as referenced earlier, the CWIP, since the 80s, in fact, was being harvested from the Bahamas. And in fact, Bahamians were unaware that a patent was given to those persons who came to the Bahamas, did the research, did the extraction, and didn't bother to be transparent with us in terms of what their objectives were. Didn't tell us. And so, Mr. Speaker, how many more resources we have lost, others have benefited from, because we have not been good gatekeepers. We have flung the gate wide open.
We only found out because we found them taking it out.
And so, Mr. Speaker, it is a new day. And I'm glad, Mr. Speaker, that we have a relationship in the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of Agriculture, with members opposite, that we seek to brief them on those matters that we're engaged in, so that in the event that there's a change in government, we don't have a disruption in the commitment to protect the patrimony of the Bahamas. And Mr. Speaker, I listened to some of the comments being made outside this place by folks who attempt to give the impression that only them care about the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, in this place, on both sides of the aisle, I believe that there are men and women, and you alluded to it earlier, Mr. Speaker, and outside of this place, there are tens of thousands of Bahamians who are committed to the protection of our resources and collaboration to make sure that we benefit. Today is yet another example. And so the modern legal approach at controlling access to our resources is what is being manifested here today. Mr. Speaker, one dimension of this bill ensures, it stipulates in fact, that approvals that are given must be shared with the clearinghouse established under Article 14 of the Nagoya Protocol. This, Mr. Speaker, allows countries to track the use of the access benefit sharing species that have been harvested. So no matter where they run, where they go, we'll be able to determine how they utilize the resources they would have gotten from us to ensure that we are able to benefit from it. Mr. Speaker, this bill also provides an avenue to make sure that traditional knowledge like bush tea, bush medicine, and other treatments that our country and our various communities have discovered and used for decades to the benefit of our people, to make sure that we benefit from these items. I'm sick and tired of the name of the Bahamas being appropriated and used, the various things that the various recipes that we have designed being used and benefiting others instead of us. And so today, we are sending a clarion call to all Bahamians. Take the time, patent those things that you have developed. Join with the community that you're in. If you have traditional ways of doing things that's beneficial to the country, whether it's in terms of health, whether it's in terms of lifting spirit, which is what culture does, let's make sure that we benefit from those things that we create. Mr. Speaker, there's a debate that is raging today around the possibility of the introduction of medicinal marijuana. And while all of those details, Mr. Speaker, have not been worked out, and I would not preempt the Prime Minister in any announcement he may make, I want to say this very slowly. I wish to assure the Bahamian community that in this cabinet, that we are committed to ensuring that we have Bahamian wealth creation. That it's not going to be persons who are already living large, as young people say, who pocket gunky, will not be at the front of the line to ensure that they continue to benefit from the very area that has incarcerated so many Bahamians for years. Mr. Speaker, so this is not a blow for recreational marijuana. I certainly don't support that. But if the medicinal marijuana is to emerge, and I must say the Ministry of Agriculture on a technical basis is beginning the preparation in the event that the cabinet determines that is the route that it's going to go. But I say on the record that there are enough of us who have made a determination that the average Bahamian man or woman should be at the front of the line to benefit from any move in that direction. Mr. Speaker, on the same score, industrial hemp, which we do not believe, which we know does not require an amendment to the Dangerous Drug Act, is an opportunity waiting to explode in the Bahamas in producing a wide range of products. The Prime Minister has sent a clear message of his support for this industry to be developed. We have had numerous consultations with various stakeholders, and we are excited of the prospect of moving in that direction fairly quickly. So we have met to date with more than 7 Bahamian companies. 1 or 2 of them have international contacts that wish to partner with them. And we want to make it clear that in that area as well, Bahamians will be at the front of the line for the development of industrial hemp in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, we want to make it clear for those who confuse industrial hemp with the stuff that some folks used to smoke when they were in school. Because in this regard, you and I are alike. High school. She said not high school. So, Mr. Speaker, in the industrial hemp, we want to make it absolutely clear that the THC content in it is really less than 1%. It's in fact imperceptible. That there's no buzz you're going to get. You're not going to get high, and so it's important. The education program is going to be a forerunner to decision being made, but we want you to know it is not that kind of party. And so
Medicinal benefit.
you get the benefits without the buzz. And Mr. Speaker, the medicinal benefits without the buzz. And so Mr. Speaker, in that area, it's sort of like, I don't drink the strongest drink. I mean, Radler has 2%. But in fact, Geritol, I'm told, have 12% alcohol. And, so that's my strongest drink. But Mr. Speaker, residents of Marco City, Bahamians, we love this country. And we believe side opposite and the independents, certainly a number of them who I know personally, one, a personal friend, love this country. And so we are going to act in your interest. Some days we will not get it right. And in humility, we would accept the criticism and pivot and make the adjustments necessary. And in this politics, unfortunately, we are good at demonizing each other. And especially, not just in the traditional parties, but especially those who seek to sit where we are privileged to be sitting now. But there ought to be intellectual honesty when we make our case in the marketplace of ideas. An intellectual honesty would say, I heard a fella came in Marco City, where we work assiduously on behalf of all residents. FNMs, PLPs, independents, we don't watch colors in Marco City.
You have the rally?
And talking nonsense about why agriculture has not moved at the rate that it needs. But the reality is, no one in this place would seek to protect a merchant class to ensure that agricultural production does not increase so that one group can maintain its hold on food distribution in the Bahamas. Lie and tell. It is not the case. We are absolutely committed to food security in this Bahamas, and that is precisely why we've gotten the Cabinet of the Bahamas to make landmark decisions like determining that 40% of all food consumed by hotels, restaurants, and other agencies in this country is sourced from Bahamian. And if the government is going to have the moral authority to talk about this, then the government must spend 75 cents of every dollar with Bahamian producers to feed this country. We have the ability to dramatically reduce the $1 billion food bill that we have in this country. And over the next 3 years, if we work consistently, collaboratively, we can shave $300 million off our food bill. We have the ability to do it. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am saying to the Bahamian people, it is okay to have a righteous restlessness for change in the country. But let's remember, if we're going to build this country, we have to do it together. Let's do it collaboratively, not by demonizing each other, not by engaging in the kind of tribalism that separates our good efforts, but we can work in tandem with each other. We can compete on the basis of good ideas, good programs, and the people are smart enough to know who to choose based on those ideas. And so with that, I would say, Mr. Speaker, I support this bill. I commend the minister and his team for a series of transformative legislation. This administration is committed not merely to talking about protecting resources, but look at the legislative record that we have put in place in order to do just that. With those words, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to provide for the... What I said? Oh, that was a Freudian slip. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to provide for the protection and sustainable use of biological resources and traditional knowledge. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for the Exumas and Ragged Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm always grateful to stand on behalf of the fearless people of Exuma and, of course, Ragged Island. I'm grateful to be able to make the presentation today on the Biological Resources and Traditional Knowledge Bill 2021. I was chatting recently, just briefly, a minute ago with the member for Angliston, who indicated that this work started some time ago. I'm sure the member for Angliston will speak to this, but that made me even more proud to associate myself with this bill and to confirm that we will support it. There are some recommendations. I will return to this a little later. But as we have this happy moment of celebrating this bill, I wish not to forget that the economy is still crumbling around us. It is still collapsing at the hands of this administration. And your time is running out. And your fault lines are showing. And we're not seeing any transformative initiatives to bring short or medium-term relief to the Bahamian people. Many are still hungry. Many are still being evicted. Many still can't pay their mortgage, their children's school fees. Many still struggle to find the next meal. So let's not forget the pain that COVID has inflicted. And let us always remember that these issues really started before the pandemic and before or during. At your hands, the hands of this administration. The issue, Mr. Speaker, is that we must continue to modernize the existing orders that are in place, to bring relief to the suffering, to bring some growth to the economy, domestic and otherwise. We are trapped under the thumb of a competent authority that makes decisions based on nothing tangible, it appears, and without the benefit of broad-based consultation. Just this week, we are told that the Melia Resort on Cable Beach is closing for 2 years. The Minister of Tourism was quoted as being blindsided by this. And I must say that this perhaps speaks to the relationship or lack of relationship that this administration is fostering with the key stakeholders, like Bahama and other major stakeholders. Leader of the opposition spoke to some similar concern in his constituency. But in this case, it's the same Bahama you were taking credit of when it was successful, even though you falsely claimed that it was a fake resort and a fake transaction and a fake sale. I guess that was election time. So I call on Bahamians everywhere to understand that election time is here again, and that this same administration will say many more of these ridiculous things as they said before. This closure of Melia leaves hundreds of people potentially permanently out of work at the resort. Yet we have emergency orders that allow the employers not to pay their full severance. Surely, if the investor can find $100 million to invest in the property, it can and must find the severance for persons being permanently laid off. People are concerned. they're talking about this. And there are thousands of other Bahamians across the length and breadth of our country, in Exuma, in New Providence, and all of our islands, where employees or former employees find themselves in this most precarious position. I'm a businessman, and I understand that there are some realities. There are some financial implications for business. I get it. I'm not oblivious to it. But I come to tell you that Bahamians across the country face these same realities. They face their own financial pains as well. The very basics of life: food, rent, mortgage, school fees, feeding their children. But yet I am concerned that there are even more ridiculous things being said, most recently by the Minister of Labor in his bubble, who talked about unemployment being down drastically, although his director says it ranges still in the 40% range. We don't have the labor force studies. It'll be interesting once these reports are released, which are late, by the way. But I trust that this administration will remove themselves from the bubble and put themselves in the real world. If we must have emergency orders, which at this point we are repeatedly saying needs adjusting, if we must have them, make them make sense. Make them make sense. After a year, after many changes, enough experience has been gained around the world as to how you can deal with certain aspects of the pandemic with regard to economic and social stability. What we need after all this time are some reasonable thresholds for triggers as to when businesses open, when businesses close, when schools open, when schools close. Some scientific triggers. My opinion, and I listened to the member for Carmichael laying the order, removing or extending the time frame that Grand Bahama is outside of curfew. But my opinion is that the curfew on no island at this point should begin before midnight. And I urge the government to make that adjustment forthwith. If we reduce the curfew, it will give more businesses more time to collect more revenues and help out the domestic economy until we get more tourists again. For instance, we see a special exemption for Fusion. We saw no such exemptions for Galleria or Mario's, and yet they complain. Sporadic, haphazard. Make it make sense.
Honorable member, Chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town. On the point of order.
Just to inform the member for Exuma and others so that there's no misconception, Mario's does have the opportunity to open, as does Fusion. We were contacted by Galleria, and now we are in the process. The ministry is taking a look at the proposal that's coming in from Galleria. The technical professionals in the Ministry of Health look at these proposals, look at the structures, and unlike what the member is saying, based on scientific metrics, they make decisions as to whether or not a business can open based on capacity and the space. Even the ceiling heights are taken into consideration, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, I believe it's today's journals that speak to the issue of the exemptions not applying to all. I urge the minister to perhaps acquaint himself with those stories. And, if that is the case, perhaps the matter is corrected. But we must make these things make sense. not ad hoc, not just for one, but across the board. Transparency, Mr. Speaker. And then we have some restaurants attached to hotels that can do indoor dining with rapid antigen tests, while others can't. There are many examples throughout the globe where this is handled properly. And we're not saying that we throw caution to the wind. We're saying do some things to allow the domestic economy to thrive. Maybe this is the time to look at rapid antigen testing for family island travel rather than requiring PCR testing, as USA is requiring for many of their states for return to the US. If we allow the domestic economy to move, if we allow domestic tourism to move, we will ease some of the pressure. And I urge you to do so. Mr. Speaker, we've heard the previous speakers in relation to this bill. And I want to concede that as I read and researched this issue, I found it quite fascinating. But I see opportunities for Bahamians, for our country, to put money in the coffers. But I ask that you not delude yourself in thinking that this is a strategy to heal the hurting today. So I want you not to lose focus that people are hurting, people are hungry, workers are distraught. The misery index is still high. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition and the member for Angliston will no doubt speak to the Nagoya Protocol, as mentioned by the member for Marathon. But I draw reference to an IDB study that was articulated in a Tribune article dating back to October 2020. I won't quote from it, but I find it fascinating to put in perspective that our exclusive economic zone, our country, is 260,000 square miles. Only 5% of it, Mr. Speaker, is land. 95% is water. It is fascinating, therefore, that we must unlock the possibility of the blue economy. And it is stunning when you think of it that we have done a horrible job at managing this 260,000 square miles, mostly water. We've done a poor job at managing and harnessing the natural resources contained therein. The multiplicity of species. It is stunning that we have not benefited enough, and as leaders, we have not caused the Bahamian people to benefit. We have not sufficiently harnessed the marine resources contained therein. Species that are lucrative for pharmaceuticals and otherwise. I understand that during the decade of 2000, more than 100 permits per annum were issued for research in our waters. 90% of them to foreigners. I understand that there are more than 125 new products. I understand that there are a significant number of these products that sought patenting in USA and Canada. And if we review the USA patent database, we will see that significant amounts have been granted. So what do we get? These are our things. And they are patenting the use of our genetic species found in Bahamian waters. And we have not done a good job at managing this. So here's what the PLP will do. We will harness the blue economy. We will maximize economic growth from this 260,000 square miles. We will cause there to be environmental sustainability. We will cause there to be controlled and regulated harnessing of these resources. And we will cause there to be economic production and benefit to the Bahamian people as a result of harnessing these species. So, Mr. Speaker, the IDB's recommendations acknowledged not just the sea whip, but the sea cucumbers, the sea moss, pelagic species, and marine biotechnology as possibilities for growing our economy. They are niches that we can explore, and we must do so, Mr. Speaker. There is one more Southern Shores. It is called the stromatolites. The stromatolites. And I always wondered why the breeze was so clear and clean when I traveled through the Exuma Keys. And it appeared that I had an abundance of oxygen just available to me that I don't experience anywhere in the world, Mr. Speaker. But there's an ecological explanation to this. You see, the stromatolites are found in abundance in the Exuma Keys. And they're only found one other place in the world, according to the studies. And that's Western Australia. Mr. Speaker, I am grateful to the former member of parliament, one of the former members of parliament for Exuma, the Honorable George A. Smith, who has pointed out this most rare species to me. And on doing so, I've undertaken in my platform for Exuma to ensure that we work with international bodies like UNESCO to protect this species. And we encourage the School of Marine Resources of an established institution, university, in collaboration with the University of the Bahamas and BAMSI, to take up a post in the Exuma Keys for the purposes of continuing this study. It is the oldest known macrofossil known to man, dating back over 3 billion years, Southern Shores. It's dominating the fossil records for 80% of the planet's history. You hear me? This is the oldest living species known to man. Known to man. In the Exuma Keys. And in only one other place in the world. And I knew there was an ecological explanation because this fossil, macro-fossil species is believed to give off oxygen. Believed to give off oxygen. And therefore, this member of parliament will ensure that the blue economy and the research to be done in collaboration with that university and BAMSI and UB and UNESCO will make this a central focus. That's what the PLP administration will do. Mr. Speaker, I now draw attention to the bill. And I have three recommendations. Firstly, the definition of micro is missing. And on consultation with people in this industry, we could see permit holders disputing what micro means. Since I am told that scientists in this field often debate this, and there's no definition in the interpretation section of the bill. I think we should clarify this to include molecular, and ultra microscopic levels. That's my advice, and I urge the Minister of the Environment, who is learned in these matters, to consider the point. On page 11, 6L, there is a word before the words codes of conduct that says voluntary. I would recommend that the word voluntary be deleted, since it seemed to imply that codes of conduct, guidelines, and best practices are optional. And I'm certain that is not the intent of this bill. And finally, on page 16, Mr. Speaker, 12C and 12D talks about making financial contributions to the Environmental Administration Fund, both 12C and 12D. One of them would be redundant, and I invite the minister to consider this final point. But we support the bill, Speaker. The bill will help to protect our things. The bill will help to bring order in the harnessing of our natural resources and our genetic species found in our massive economic zone of 260,000 square miles. The bill will help Bahamians to benefit from this exclusive economic zone. But what's next? Oftentimes we put legislation on the books, like the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and we don't follow the letter of the law. We should have now debated the strategy of getting our economy going. We ought to have done so before the end of January, and we have not done so. There seems to be no experience about it. It's like you break the law and you don't care. I find it disturbing. You put laws on the books that you don't plan to follow, that you don't plan to leverage. So what's next with this piece of legislation? I recommend a few things. Firstly, that we pursue the owners of the existing patents and we seek to engage them. We seek out the owners of the existing, potentially new products. And we examine how the blue economy in our country could benefit. Thirdly, that we carefully examine all research being done now in our country, genetic and otherwise. Fourthly, we examine all such agreements for research in our country that exist and ensure that they are equitable on behalf of the Bahamian people. 5, that we carefully scrutinize the activity in the area we call the tongue of the ocean. And 6, we examine the industry opportunities and we study the potential and we educate Bahamians as to what the niches might be that might create jobs, that might create opportunities, and that might create wealth for Bahamians. As an aside, Mr. Speaker, as I travel abroad, I often wonder why we don't protect our own intellectual properties more. And I'm no legal mind, but I get perplexed when I travel in the US and I see a restaurant called Bahamas so-and-so, or Bahamas so-and-so, or Exuma so-and-so. I'm perplexed by that. Because I don't believe that foreigners should loosely use our things without our permission or without we receiving some royalties. It's our brand. It's our things. And we must therefore draw on our legal experts to examine how we might protect our intellectual property. When I see a restaurant called Bahamas or Bahamian anything, because the brand is so strong, because it's better in the Bahamas, I want to go in there. And I want to experience what they've got to offer, knowing full well that my Bahamian people ain't benefiting from the use of our things. So yes, in the blue economy, a progressive Liberal Party government will seek to create jobs, will seek to create opportunities for Bahamians, will seek to cause there to be economic growth. And as we struggle with sources for foreign exchange, we will seek to examine how we can get royalties from these patents and patents to come that will generate foreign exchange dollars for our country. That's what we will do. As a boy growing up in Forbes Hill, Little Exuma, there was a passage in the good book where fishermen were having trouble. And the word came down to cast the net on the other side. And that's what we will do in relation to the blue economy. There was a former Minister of Tourism who liked to tell the story of men who were out to sea in a Boston whaler. Garden Hills will appreciate this. And the engine stopped working, and they had been adrift, and they were thirsty. And they prayed, and they heard a voice. Cast your bucket where you are. And it repeated. And they were thirsty, but they knew that there was salt water. And they dipped, and it was salt. And they prayed, and the voice said, cast your bucket where you are. Cast your net and your bucket on the other side. And there was fresh water. And they quenched their thirst. So oftentimes we complain about tourism. We lament the struggles that we face in our economy. But oftentimes we do not see the opportunities that are right before us. And this is why I've taken the time to talk about how a progressive Liberal Party administration will be sure to harness the opportunities available to us in the blue economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many, Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Centerville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the honorable members of the House of Assembly for indulging me for a few minutes. This is not, Mr. Speaker, my area of expertise, but I would not have let a moment go by without ensuring that we're able to recognize the importance of our natural resources. I want to say thank you, as always, to the people of Centerville for their continued support. I want to thank Mr. Aj Cunningham from the Bahamas Natural Resources Foundation and his team for assisting me, for educating me in as much as they can on the natural resources of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I listened intently to the member for Marathon who would have moved, as well as his colleague from Marco City. Now, before I begin, I just wanted to acknowledge that this falls under the Ministry of Environment. And I think Marathon would be the one responsible. And I just don't want to go too far into the communication without recognizing some of the environmental, or one of the environmental concerns in particular in the Centerville constituency. Mr. Speaker, we have 7 government-assisted housing buildings in our community, quite a lot. And the condition of these buildings I've spoken to for many years. And that is one of the most unfortunate, one of the things that I really wish I could have done to help the people in those government-assisted housing buildings, to help them to have a place where they are able to appreciate it, where they're able to have their dignity because of the environment in which they live. And I encourage the minister to pay more attention to those government-assisted housing. Those places breed behemins. And this, it's about us and us being able to identify with who we are. And so I just want, I just wanted to throw that out there because this was something that, I went into the ministry actually and had a meeting with the persons responsible for these government-assisted housing facilities. And I thought that we would have gotten somewhere with it. But Mr. Speaker, nothing. The buildings are still the same way they were. No improvement. But yet, we speak to doing what we can for people, the Bahamian people, especially in these areas that need so much. Mr. Speaker, Senate supports the bill that's brought before us today, the biological resources and traditional knowledge. I was a bit concerned because a lot of times I look at bills and I really only look for, well, there are a couple of things I look for, but one of the main things I look for is what is in this bill for Bahamians? Where does it trickle down? How does it touch us? And this would have been a good bill to make sure the Bahamian citizen was in this bill. The citizen, the Bahamian citizen, legislative, not policy, legislative, so that we can see how this biodiversification would help us in the long run, or even in the short term. Not once in this bill, Mr. Speaker, was the term natural resources mentioned. I understand that the minister would have spoken to genetic resources, and that was clear throughout his presentation. We were speaking to genetic resources, and I understand that the Nagoya protocols would speak to genetic resources. And we keep talking about the Nagoya protocols, but there are other resources that are not genetic that I think the Bahamian people are also concerned about. And I think that the Nagoya protocols can actually encapsulate even the other natural resources that we speak of, not just the genetic, and the genetics are fine, because there is an avenue there for us to recognize and realize our identity and how we can share it with others, access it, and of course, value it. To me, the bill, there's not enough reach, Mr. Minister. It's good. I mean, it's a good start. As a matter of fact, like the Exuma would have mentioned that, they would have done, the PLP would have done something to this effect prior. Well, prior, right? No one.
Chair recognizes Honorable Member for the Exumas on a point of order.
I usually don't dispute the member for Centerville, but I don't want to be misquoted either. The point I made about what was done previously was that the work had started. End of story. Everything else I said about what a PLP administration would do, I'm talking about after the next general election. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
Yes, carry on.
Thank you very much, Exuma, for the clarification, because this is that season now. So we will talk a lot about what we will do. And that is okay. But right now, we're not voting on what you will do if you're not going to show us how you're going to do it. We want you to say what you're going to do, and then we want you to come back and tell us how you're going to do it. Mr. Speaker, I think again, like I had indicated, the bill, there was not enough reach for me with regards the educational aspect of the bill. I think that at some point it said that the principal beneficiaries of money from the fund that this bill created are environmental education throughout the educational system. I just want us to take that seriously. The education can't just stop here. It just can't be a law, and you have these protocols that you may put in place or some standards or infrastructure that you would expect will prevent or access. But we need our young children indulged in the education of who we are, which really leads to our genetic heritage. Mr. Speaker, the research aspect of it is great, but we need to be able to ensure that jobs and career paths are identified for our people. Putting an infrastructure in place and there's no monitoring or enforcement of those laws or regulations or rules, back to the same thing I was, Senate Bill asked for many years. You know, we can produce laws. The country is good at that. We produce enough laws to get that big check from one of the international bodies who require you to put a certain law in place. And then when you, as a matter of fact, I think this group got a check. Just so that it said that the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund will receive.
Honorable member, what document is that?
This is the Tribune, January 28th, so just about 3 weeks ago.
You're adopting?
Yes. And it's just speaking to funds being received, 1.1 million. And the funds will be administered by the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. I'm just saying that, you know, we can't just put these laws in place. You know, and sometimes, in my opinion, I feel a lot of these laws, even from the time, you know, I came into the Parliament, are put in place to receive that next funding. It isn't about the next funding. It's about the next generation of Bahamians. That's what I want to talk about. That's what I want to see in legislation. Mr. Speaker, we need to talk about more jobs, more career paths in your blue economy. More jobs, more career paths in our economy, the economy of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, there are quite a number of acts. The National Trust Act, the Protected Area Act, the Conservation Act. I mean, almost, that's why when the member for Marathon said 8, I was confused. It is 10. I was confused because there's so many acts in terms of dealing with the environment. And these might...
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marathon on a point of order.
Yes, I really don't like to interrupt my colleagues when they're mid-flight, but there's some things happening there. First of all, just as a point of fact, there were no environmental laws on the books when we came in. So I don't know about many being on the books. There were none. We now are about to put the 10th. Another fundamental thing that I would encourage the member for Senate to appreciate it just a little bit, with just a little bit more clarity, is that genetic resources are a part of the natural resources. This act is entitled Biological Resources. It's not just the genetic material, it's the chemical constituents contained within our flora and fauna that we're talking about here. That's an important distinction. And the other thing that you're talking about, the Bahamas Protected Areas Trust Fund, a clearer understanding of that is that that's a mechanism by which marine protected areas receive funding in perpetuity, and those marine protected areas actually hire people and work with people. It is a part of the blue economy and the career development path. So I would just encourage you to take note of the fact that natural resources include all things in nature, not just physical resources, but also biological and fauna. And I also encourage you to take note of a historical fact that when I came to office, there were no environmental laws. And now we're debating the 10th one.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, I don't have as much resources at my fingertips as the parties that have been around for some while. And, you know, when I talk about environmental laws that would have been around, I think the member for Marathon would agree with me that we did have a Forest Act. That's environmental. Best Commission. You have the AMMC Act. These are...
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marathon.
The Privy Council in the Save Guanaquip Reef case determined that the Best Commission was an internal advisory body. So that is totally and absolutely incorrect. Now, I would never accuse the member or any member in here of deliberately misleading this House. I would never do that. I would never do that because I respect all my colleagues. But the fact of the matter is this. The Best Commission was adjudicated by our highest court, the Privy Council, on a Bahamian case, Save Guanakiri, followed up by the Wilson City case, where they confirmed and affirmed that the Best Commission is an internal advisory body, which is why when we passed the Environmental Planning and Protection Act 2019, it was so significant because now you have a legislated body. So the fact of the matter is, BEST wasn't legislated. No environmental department that deals with the green environment, not the brown. There's a distinction between green and brown. There was absolutely none in the green. And that's why this is so historic. And that's why this debate is so historic. So please, please, a lot of people look up to you. And I look up to you too. So I want to enjoy the rest of your debate. And hopefully I won't have to get up anymore.
Thank you very much, Marathon. I appreciate your words of encouragement. However, I still stand by the position that there were some legislation prior that it would have had some impact on our laws. And so the education, of course, from the Best Commission and what they were and how they evolved, that's also very important. And for that, I'm sure the Bahamian people thank you. Mr. Speaker, these various acts like the Bahamas National Trust Act, Bahamas Protected Areas, the Conservation Acts, these are all acts I find, or I believe, have some impact in terms of our environment. I was glad to hear the member for Marathon indicate his thoughts on the consolidation of these agencies and how this particular bill would help to consolidate them, because I do think they're overlapping. There are so many agencies within this framework, I believe, are very overlapping. As a matter of fact, I think that in some reading, I believe the Bahamas Protected Areas Act seemed to almost have similar objectives as the bill that we are discussing. So, Mr. Speaker, I just believe that when we start to introduce these bills or when we introduce these laws, we need to ensure that our compliance units are in place. And I do believe that, I heard that you spoke about consultation. I heard the member talk about consultation. And like I said last time, I would hope that the Bahamas Association of Compliance Officers are consulted more often in terms of our compliance with our laws and our rules and our regulations. In particular, in this case, I would hate to see this particular bill not monitored or no quality assurance program in it. And that is why I made reference to the government-assisted housing. If you can't monitor or have a quality assurance program in place for that, about 7 of them in the Centerville constituency, how are you going to monitor and enforce genetic resource access and benefits? I mean, this is just strange to me that we want to do so much more without fixing what we have. And so I think that when we look at advancement, and I could appreciate advancement, and I do think your bill, Mr. Minister, is an advancement, but let's not leave out our people. If we're going to go to the extent of Nagoya Protocol, which speaks to standards, monitoring and enforcement, and compliance, what about those many families in our government-assisted housing over in the Centerville area? still waiting for a septic tank to be cesspit to be fixed, or plumbing to be done, or whatever else. There's just so much work that needs to be done over there. Mr. Speaker, I know I mentioned the forestry unit. I the member of a marathon who's responsible for, I think the forestry unit is a part of his ministry. This forestry unit, Mr. Speaker, I mean, I haven't seen any reports, but I believe the director of the forestry unit is supposed to present a national plan to this House. And even when you look at his responsibilities as director, it does encompass access and benefit sharing and valuation. So I'm just trying to figure out to what extent I noticed that, the member would have brought some amendments to the Forestry Act, but I don't know if we need to go back and meet our obligations from the existing laws that would impact this biological resource and traditional knowledge area. But there are things that need to be fixed. So after looking and being in this parliament, Mr. Speaker, for 4 years, and then of course, you have to do your research, a little research when you're an independent, because you got to, you want to know whether or not it's one party did it, or is it just a continuation of one party's agenda? Because we need the Bahamian people to understand what's going on in here. So, Mr. Speaker, I can appreciate the biological resource and traditional knowledge bill. And, I appreciate Marathon's comment with regards, they are part of our natural resources. There was one thing, Mr. Speaker, as Senator Bill would have given notice about the Select Committee for Natural Resources that came to my attention. We do not have a legislative definition for natural resources. We don't. Why? I don't know. But I would like to see a definition, a legal definition of natural resources in our laws. So you could say to me, by way of policy, that the airspace is a natural resource. The genetic resources is a natural resource. But if it is not legislated, Mr. Speaker, if there is no legislation that defines what our natural resources are, how are we going to get to the bottom of it? Centerville needs to know what is the legal definition of natural resources so that we can hold the government accountable, legally accountable and liable. And so when we speak about natural resources, we're not talking about a policy definition. This is too serious, Mr. Speaker, to have a policy definition that may change almost as much or as fast as Wikipedia. Mr. Speaker, this is legislation on behalf of the Bahamian people. And the only thing you could do is tell me that this is in natural resources? No. We want a definition of natural resources in our legislation. So, Mr. Speaker, on that note, I just want to, as I conclude, because I think I would have mentioned the consolidation aspect, compliance aspect, also accountability. But when we speak to sustainability, when we are speaking to the next generation of Bahamians, We want legislation. We don't want to, and it's been 4 years now, just about, and it's like we are afraid to legislate Bahamianization. What is the problem? We talk about it as policy or guidelines, I presume. Legislate it. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for legislation of Bahamianization. We just shouldn't see Bahamian citizen just in the immigration laws. Go on.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marco City.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Bill, for yielding. I just wanted to get a sense because I consulted with the minister from Marathon. He was unclear as I'm unclear. You mentioned the need for, it would have been beneficial to have natural resources in this particular legislation. What I didn't or we didn't understand is what is the deficiency that if you had placed that in the legislation that would solve, because that could help us in looking at the bill going forward.
Thank you very much, Marco City. The deficiency from my, sorry.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marathon.
Before you answer that, Senator Bill, let me just read out something from the Environmental Planning and Protection Act, because you asked about whether or not we had a definition of natural resources. And you wanted one, you insisted that we ought to have a definition of natural resources. And so in the same piece of legislation that we brought, that I tabled and that you voted for, the Environmental Planning and Protection Act, there is a definition of natural resources. So I will invite you to consider this as you respond to the requisition from the member from Marco City. Natural resources means, and this is in the definitions of the Environmental Planning and Protection Act 2019 that we actually tabled, right? And that I'm actually very proud of, as a matter of fact. Natural resources means the living plants, animals, organisms, and other biological factors within the environment and the geologic formations, mineral deposits, renewable and non-renewable assets, and the habitat of living plants, animals, organisms, and other biological factors. And that is perhaps one of the most comprehensive definitions possible of natural resources, even beyond the natural interpretation given in the ministry. So let me just, in the dictionary. So let me just rest that there so your answer could be conditioned by that bit of information.
Thank you very much, Marathon, for that somewhat of a, well, thank you very much, Marathon, for the definition. Wait, let me finish so I could just answer that, please. For the definition that you would have provided by way of that particular piece of legislation.
Honorable member, chair recognizes the honorable member for Marathon.
When we tabled the bill, the Environmental Planning and Protection Act in 2019, each member of this House was given a copy. Each member of this House had, this is over a year ago, well over a year. Each member of the House would have had ample opportunity to go over it and acquaint themselves with it. And I appreciate that a lot has happened, COVID, Dorian, the whole 9 yards, and perhaps members may have forgotten some of the contents in the bills previously distributed and assumed to have been read and understood. So then I invite all members to take a further look. So this isn't a definition that is being provided out of convenience. This is a definition that was enacted in 2019. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
Honorable member for Sandoval, perhaps you could be guided by the fact that usually in statute law, only matters that need to be defined in a specific statute are listed. So this statute doesn't reference natural resources, so there's no requirement for it to be defined in this act. And I believe the member for Marathon was simply pointing out that it is defined in another act.
Correct. Okay. Once again, Marathon, thank you very much for that definition, which I believe not to be as comprehensive. And so I I take your point that it is in that particular bill. And I think what is driving my questioning, my statement, Mr. Speaker, is when we look at the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act and we speak to the natural resources having an impact on the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act, there is no definition, because now that definition doesn't align with what the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act talks about when it talks about natural resources, because that definition doesn't mention oil. The Sovereign Wealth Fund Act does. And so if
Oil is a biological formation.
it has Mr. Bamboo Town and Marathon,
I just quoted that.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marathon.
That I just quoted it means living plants, animals, organisms, and other biological factors within the environment and the geologic formations, mineral deposits, renewable and non-renewable assets. That includes oil. Well, whether people, right, whether you want to believe it or not, oil is actually a natural substance formed by this planet, right? Okay. From living plants and animals that are fossilized and decomposed over geologic time. So I don't see how oil could possibly not be included in that. I mean, it's self-evident.
Okay, thank you very much. The member for Marathon, you're more versed in that area. And so Centerville will take another look at that. And thank you very much. I mean, those are some big words you're using. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult for Centerville it's very difficult because see, I have to go into the Centerville constituency and talk to my constituents about what the natural resources are and how they will be impacted. This is why, Mr. Speaker, we're having such a challenge. You know, I think the member for Marco City spoke to people getting a check from these natural resources. But if we understand and can identify with what we believe our natural resources are, then the communication and education could be more smoother. So Marathon, thank you. You know, like I said, you're the, you know, those words are some big words. I was, you know, but I'm fairly new to the biological biodiversification functions of the geological aspect of oil. so my good colleague Marathon, I appreciate you. I appreciate you, and I appreciate the your presentation. Centerville supports. Well, you spoke about the money, your lane shifted. But we just wanna I just wanna say thank you very much. Why y'all don't let Centerville finish the presentation? Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to say to the member for both Marathon and Marco City, Centerville supports the bill. A few questions, and we just want to make sure that we understand what natural resources are and where we can take it for the benefit of the Bahamian people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your attention.
Thank you, honorable member. As many, chair recognizes the honorable member for Angleston.
Thank you, Speaker. I am so privileged, Mr. Speaker, to be able to stand in this honorable house.
Just a moment.
I'm not able to come back after lunch. I'm not going to be long.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
I like how you take charge of this house, Angleston. Nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, the member would have asked a particular question. I'm just wanting to make sure during his contribution, but I believe the member said that we needed to legislate Bahamianization. Was that what you said, member? If you want to.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamakro.
And it's crossed by, not by design. But I think the father of the humanization, who is now represented, I know, now represented by the next speaker. I think we should move Keladan Rumkins in Salvador, unless there's, yeah.
Yeah, your name, please. Your name, please.
The father of the humanization. And I think, Mr. Speaker, I've heard it said.
Don't move it, that's prophetic.
Yeah.
Don't move it.
I've heard it said.
No, the position will change.
Honorable members.
Yeah.
The chair recognizes honorable member for Yamakro.
On a number of occasions, Mr. Speaker, that there has not, the whole question of dehumanization and legislating dehumanization has not been met. So when you look at any piece of legislation, especially major legislation, they take into consideration, especially when we're looking at citizenship, public policy, which looks at the norms and mores of society. No, the norms and mores of the society. That really encapsulated. But Mr. Speaker, I've heard a lot of people speak about the Commercial Enterprises Act, one of the only legislation which takes into consideration, Mr. Speaker, a comprehensive analysis of strategic plans for businesses coming into the Bahamas and training specifically for Bahamians for those positions for which those work permits are being granted. And for anybody who would have sit on side officer on the NEC, when we look at those applications and persons coming in for foreign direct investment, one of the things you have to look at is to see the person who is bringing in and how do they fit in to protect their interests. So, Mr. Speaker, in fact, and under the Commercial Enterprises Act, which envisions a contemporary movement of applications to the Immigration Department. Mr. Speaker, you see evidence of the dehumanization of a process where we've decided on areas that we would want fintech or whatever have we would want to develop along with Bahamians, and we invite persons in Jamaica to come and bring their businesses wholesale, but there's a specific requirement for Bahamians to be a part of that process and also train them for the very jobs for which these individuals are holding work permits for. So, in fact, Mr. Speaker, there is not just an attempt, but there's legislation that we have provided. And there may be those who would say, well, look at the quickness of the application. In a contemporary world where we have...
Honorable member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you for the explanation.
Thank you, Mr.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Angleton.
Thank you.
I don't know if it's something about me, Mr. Speaker. I don't know. This is happening quite frequently recently. But Speaker, I was indicating that I am very privileged to stand on behalf of the good people of Angleton. And I was not seeking to usurp the function of Bamboo Town, but I'm sure Bamboo Town understands that we're all elected members and there's a level of courtesy afforded. Well, I certainly do not subscribe to any sort of oppressive circumstance, not at this stage in my life. So that is the reason why I was indicating to the member that I would not be able to come after lunch and I would like to continue until before the luncheon hour. But I preempted him and he's actually on another matter. So I understand that point. See, but as I indicated, I'm very privileged to rise on behalf of the people of Angleton. And I want to say that I've heard some comments even in here today about the response to what is happening on the ground. And I heard one member say, we are giving you money and we are doing this. And we have to be very careful with language that's very patronizing and not respectful of what is being required of governance. Because of course you're using public funds. And you're not going to be tested by the number, how much money you spend. You know, you could come and say, all you want, we spent $10 million. That's fine. But the Bahamian people are not going to be impressed until there is a sense that globally and across the board, that there is an alleviation of suffering and amelioration of hardship. That's the test. The numbers are flying over heads, suffering heads. It's when there is this sense that there is sort of widespread or mass hardship. And I want to say that I've come across many cases, and I want to encourage the government, the Minister of Social Services. I know their hands are full. I'm very appreciative of that, and the the hardworking public officers who are on the front line of this serious situation. However, though, a government must find a way. You know, there was a former parliamentarian who used to say, our job is not completed until we wipe every tear from every eye. And he informed me recently there's another part to that. We must work hard. And that is the point I make. We must work hard. And I want to urge the government to understand that the taking people off that food program, a lot of people fell between the cracks. There's some serious hardship cases. The Department of Social Services, where there are backlogs or pressures, I want to encourage the government to do what is necessary to ensure people do not fall between the cracks. We cannot abide that in this country, Mr. Speaker. I also want to say, and I should have probably spoken about this more vigorously before, but the urban renewal has a small house repair program. I know when we served, it was very aggressive. And I mused that the member for Kalani, under a Christie administration, was able to get more houses repaired than I did in Engliston, even though we got houses repaired. So we didn't discriminate. But here, I'm looking now at what's happening. I don't know what's happening in other communities, and people are here, and you could vouch for it. But I know in Engliston, they're few and far between. And it leads me to think that the small house repair program is not a real program. You're doing little something here and there. And if it is, no problem. But I think that this is a major deficit because people are living in very difficult circumstances. They have holes in their roofs. I heard from someone yesterday, they said they can't go in a back bedroom because of the condition of the roof in there. Then it leads to mold. Mold leads to health issues. You have children in the homes. So the house repair program is an important social program. And I want to encourage the government, in Engliston in particular, if you're not doing it anywhere else, to work with me. The member for Southern Shores is here. Work with me. Let us get some houses in Engliston repaired to alleviate the suffering that I am seeing that people are currently experiencing. The other thing is, and I don't know, the member for Long Island is not here, but the cost of water. I saw some talk about, he's here, oh, right here, about increasing the cost of water, right here. And I want to say that I am trusting that this administration has not and will not do that. Because water, first of all, we're a developing nation, number one. Don't fool yourself. Secondly, access to water is critical to life and health. And I want to encourage the government, if whatever you do, do not increase the price of water. Go do what you want to do anywhere else. Do not increase the price of water. There's a reason you got water pumps, you know. They ain't just there. They're there for a reason, and it's a long policy. It's there to ensure access to water. And I want to encourage the government, do not even dream about increasing rates of water. That's my view. I speak for the people of Engliston, Speaker. Speaker, on the issue of the oil, I heard the member for Marathon, and he indicated that he looked at the rates and the chart here. And I certainly, if that chart is accurate, I find that disturbing if it's accurate. But I know I sat in the cabinet at the time, and my recollection was, because I am one of those who would be looking at that, my recollection is that we were advised by the Commonwealth Secretariat. The record will reflect. And it was the Commonwealth Secretariat that provided us as consultants to the comparative rates. And based on that, we were able, or I felt kind of comfortable that what we were doing was comparative. So I find this chart disturbing if we are being advised by the Commonwealth Secretariat and that the advice was somewhat different. So I don't know, I'm going to unilaterally go and review that. But I can tell you from my recollection, we did have advice on that. The other issue is at the time, I don't know if I say it, I supported it, I think. Because, you know, you're wondering whether it can have economic benefits for the Bahamian people, etc. But I can tell you, and I have said this publicly, that having regard to climate change and Dorian and what that did, the amount of people that killed in this country, having regard to the movement towards green energy globally, I cannot see, and I looked at Denmark. Denmark announced that in the next 2 or 3 years, they're abandoning fossil fuel. So, why is it we in the Bahamas pulling up the rear on the industry that the world is really moving away from? And so I truthfully, I think it's something that we need to review it very carefully. But I think the government has sent mixed messages on this issue. See, I could say what I believe, what I don't believe. That's just it, because, it is what it is. But when you're maneuvering and manipulating, playing footsie with the reality or the facts, it affects your credibility. The member for Marathon indicated, the Prime Minister said, this government does not support drilling. Yet, when the legal action took place, the government was right there with the oil company resisting the action. It was not, I don't see where it was necessary, it's just like you. They could argue for themselves, why are you there? But I also saw the Attorney General in a newspaper report where he was quoted as saying, when he was asked about the fact that the company found no oil, which meant the agreement has fallen away. So your politics on that kind of should finish now. But he had an interesting response. He said that he could not say whether or not the license would be renewed. But listen, first of all, you say you couldn't get out of it because of the legal position. Now you could get out of it and you ain't sure yet. You're playing footsie. And so I'm inviting the Bahamian people to keep their eye on what happens with the oil company, with this administration, because the Attorney General indicated he got to talk to his colleagues first. I thought you had a position, a principled position to the Bahamian people, but it sounds a little iffy right now. So we need clarity on that, Mr. Speaker.
The oil companies? The oil companies?
No, that's okay. When you want to speak, you go right ahead. Don't let me stop you. Because on the issue of our natural, our resources. When we became independent in '73, I am very proud of both sides, which were at the convention or the what do you call it? The convention in London. Yeah, the Constitution Convention. And so and it wasn't, it might have been, some may say it's imperfect. For me, it was good, okay? And we build on it and we improve on it. You criticize all you want, but you wasn't there and you didn't do it. We build on it. Now, in building on it, one of the issues we looked at was who we are, what we are. We changed laws. Behavioralization policy is a component of that. Because like the member for Marco City said, there was a time you went in a bank and the only thing you could do in there was mop the floor. Now we're financial services industry, top professionals in the world. So, this is what that process was about. This was the meaning of that event. So in '73, you began to look at all of these things and begin to encapsulate who it is and what it is that we are. And you're coming of your own as a people. That's what it was all about. And back in '73, we began looking at the delimitation of our maritime boundaries. It's still going on now, all these many years later. And I spoke about it in here before. And I am proud about this because successive administrations understood that this is important to what our geographic maritime boundaries are. Because the sea has wealth. That's what we're talking about today. The sea has wealth, and the Bahamas, I'm proud. The Bahamas went to the table, United Nations, in '73 and began to negotiate those boundaries. I raise that because I want to speak about the airspace. And I've spoken about it before, but I'm very, very upset about this. Because when we took on a similar process, in the '50s, we were a colony. The British had an arrangement with the Americans for our airspace. In '73, the issue was not addressed. It started to be addressed when we first served in 2002. And then the prior F&M administration, or the one that took office after that, indicated that we would never control our airspace. Former Prime Minister said that. Free National Movement, we'd never control our airspace. I never believed that. Because why not? Why not? Who could tell me I can't do it? Who? I'd like to know who is it who could tell me I cannot do it? So they stopped it in that period. And then, truthfully, they went back at it before 2012. They began to look at it again. We took office in 2012. We went at it earnestly. And I led the charge, so I know about this. Okay, I'm not speaking about secondhand knowledge. We applied to the International Civil Aviation Organization for the establishment of a flight information region, which would be a geographical spatial area that would be legally controlled by the Bahamian people, like the maritime boundaries. Additionally, we began negotiations with the Americans, who currently control the airspace from a 1953 agreement when we were colony. And I indicated before I went and I met with their Minister of State, of Transport, Secretary of State Fox, and the Obama administration. I met with ICAO. My team met with ICAO, and we were able to make tremendous strides. We even began dialogue with neighboring states. We were able I think it was April of 2017, to enter an agreement with the Americans where they conceded that we would control our own airspace. It's in writing. I've laid it here before. It's in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It was signed in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They conceded that the Bahamas would that they would support our application at ICAO. My discussion with ICAO never indicated what the member for Freetown says. They told him, he said he making a phone call. Okay, he was on the phone to somebody who's been there for 20 years. Well, we did a lot more than that. And that has been abandoned by this administration. So when we talk about this whole underlying philosophical concept of what is it you're committed to, you need to explain to the Bahamian people why you did that. See, my fear is this. How do you now go back after you have given it up like that? I said the maritime boundaries discussion started in 73. And here we are still discussing that. Dogged, insistent, fighting for our people. But in this case, you've abandoned it. And I believe that this administration has not served us well, Speaker. I heard the ministers. You talk to the minister, please, okay? So, Mr. Speaker, and let me just say, the airspace was about our sovereignty. That's what 1973 was about. It was about our national security and was about our economic benefit. And let me just say that so we don't misunderstand, because I think the Minister of Tourism at first did not fully grasp these fees. The fees you get have to be used in the aviation sector. I see he started to modify his dialogue in recent times, but they don't go. It does not go into the consolidated fund. It is. Yeah, you know that now. It goes. It must be utilized in the sector. Yes, and you know, we had anticipated. We thought that after 10 years, we would have a cadre of Bahamian professionals, just like we got a cadre of Bahamian financial service workers who started out mopping that floor. And now you're renowned globally, managing billions of dollars in other people's wealth. We thought that Bahamians would be able to build capacity, be trained, create professions, and control our airspace. But you gotta believe. You gotta believe. If you don't believe, then our people will be sold short. And I believe this administration has sold our nation short, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Southern Shores on a point of order.
Okay.
Can't allow the member. Yes, allow. I can't allow the member to leave on the record the suggestion that we in the government have abandoned the pursuit of monetizing our airspace. Because what is it? No, well, clarify for me, because that's what I'm getting. If I misunderstand, I appreciate, but that is what I'm getting. Clarify for me.
And it's because the minister has not been full and frank, but from what I'm understanding, they will collect some fees with the permission of the Americans. The Americans continue to control our airspace, not control it by virtue of an agreement with us because we've claimed our sovereign airspace, but because for whatever reasons, they've allowed us to collect some fees. So there will be some fee collection. There will be some fee collection. Yes, yes, no, that is, what's the position? Tell us, seems that you know.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
As the member for Southern Shores has started to say,
No,
our
said-
position
he
is
said it right here.
the established position that has been put forward before. The Bahamas government is taking full control of its airspace. That is the position, if I may, Mr. Speaker. Okay, what we are saying is that we own the hotel. It is our hotel. We're staking claim to it. And what we're going to do is have a manager of that hotel. But the manager doesn't own the hotel. Our airspace is our hotel. We will have a management agreement with the United States to manage our airspace, as well as Cuba, that basically manages the southern parts of the Bahamas. As a matter of fact, South Andros over the airspace over South Andros from the 1950s has been considered Cuban airspace. We are taking control of all of our airspace. And the portions that are managed by the Cubans and managed by the Americans, they are managers who will have to pay us. That is our position.
Thank you, honorable member.
First of all, the member was not a venue, and the minister responsible was in this parliament last week. Were you here? Were you here? The minister said that he spoke to IKO, and the member for North Abaco knows because we spoke after when the House adjourned. He knows. Don't get up and talk, man. The member for Freetown said in this parliament that he basically said that it would not happen, that we would not be able to lay claim to our own flight information region. You didn't hear him? He said it right here. He said he called the man from IKO on the phone. Say the man saying 20 years, only 3 countries got it. You weren't sitting there? Well, go and acquaint yourself with the differences. You're going to acquaint yourself. Go and acquaint yourself, Speaker. Speaker, on the issue of the legislation of that is on the agenda here today. I have to be fair and give credit to the Minister of Environment, because he has marshaled it to this place and it's become law. And so, and I'm sure he has a very hard-working team who has worked with him in this matter. So I give him credit, but I want to say that it is factual that this is something that has a history in it. I know I was involved, and I don't think I might have been the first involved in this. But we had when I was Minister of Transport, we put together a committee, and the committee was formed to begin dialogue. And we had brought in the Port Authority, the Office of Attorney General, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the College of the Bahamas, the BEST Commission. And it was tasked to thoroughly review the issue of research and exploratory vessels operating in the Bahamas who may come across fauna and other properties which have medicinal and other uses and have the potential to produce substantial revenue. And to also investigate any extractions and that they should be declared intellectual property of the Bahamas when found in Bahamian waters. And also that expeditions were to be undertaken with stringent guidelines, international protocols should be acceded to, and the view was that legislation should be put in place. And today we are here with the legislation, and the minister must be credited with being focused and bringing it here. But it does have some history in it. And the context, I wanted to just, I speak about it often here, is the Commonwealth of the Bahamas National Maritime Policy and Action Plan. And this was created in 2014. And this was the product also with the assistance of the Commonwealth Secretariat. And it was created with a view to creating a framework for the use of our ocean, the blue economy, whatever you want to call it, and how we could, in a sustainable way, exploit this natural resource to the benefit of all Bahamians. And this deals with a wide array of matters. I think that, and we had started an implementation platform for it, and I believe this administration might have continued with it, I'm not sure. But the purpose of the National Maritime Policy is to establish a framework that can guide the planning and development of maritime activities in a rational and sustainable manner for the social and economic development of the Bahamas. This policy is the basis for effective coordination among all government agencies with responsibility for maritime and ocean affairs, and the harmonization of national actions in relation to the marine resources of the Bahamas. And and as you go through, it tells you, it makes recommendations of what things should happen in fisheries and shipping, and on and on. It talks about climate change. And so we had begun this work, and hopefully this administration will be guided by it. And sometimes, it's okay to acknowledge, that you are in a continuum of progress for the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker. But the maritime policy speaks also to shipping, because shipping is one of it's a mainstay for our economy. And of course, our ports are critical. In Grand Bahama, that strategic port in Freeport, which moves so much, they said 90% of world trade is moved by sea. It moves goods throughout the world, and it comes through our Commonwealth, the Bahamas and Grand Bahama. And that is why Prince George Dock, that is one of the reasons, maybe people will understand now why I was so vexed at how this administration, in my view, not appreciating the value of that port to the Bahamian people. In fact, I think this is probably the third or fourth busiest touristic port, cruise port in the world. And so it's a very valuable resource. I only heard the minister talk it down and all this kind of thing, and he brought in a foreign company, which he says is not foreign because it has Bahamian involvement. But I saw a post I made on Facebook based on my summary of the heads of agreement. And this is what I pulled from the heads of agreement. This is what this government agreed for Prince George Dock, as we talk about our resources, the marine resources, and the wealth of the Bahamian people. 50 cents a head, $2 million per year. That's what they're paying. And we get 50 cents a head. Then they get it, and when you look at the renewals and the commitment to private ownership, it amounts to 55 years, not the years that they're telling us. And then it puts on the government the burden to undertake millions of dollars in dredging. So we give it away, then we got to dredge. Then we let them collect the taxes, collect the fees, collect the rents. They are able to give the concessions. They are, and that bill was passed here. We agreed to that. Well, we didn't support that. But this administration gave that company the right to collect taxes, and we can get the 50 cents and the $2 million a year for one of the busiest cruise ports in the world. And they haven't brought $1 to the table. This company ain't bring $1 to the table. They're raising funds locally, and they're going to be able to use the dock as a asset to charge for funding. That's what's happened here. And so when we look at at what they're saying in here and what that purpose was in 73, 72 in London, December. When we look at that and we understand what it is we were relinquishing and what it is we were hoping for our people.
Honorable member?
Yes.
I need a motion from honorable member for Bamboo Town.
You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was hoping we'd been able to let the member for Engliston complete. She has about another 7 minutes, but we do have to in order to go to the House. I do move that the business of this House to continue beyond 1 p.m. No, I'm going to let you finish. Got 7 minutes. So, Mr. Speaker, I do move that the business of this House continues beyond 1 p.m.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House to extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour. Any members who are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House will extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Angliston.
Thank you. I'm aware, Do you understand that I'm aware? I want you to know that, okay? Be assured I'm aware. No, that's okay. So, Mr. Speaker, when you look at what has happened with that shipping, which is part of the whole marine, the blue economy, and how we treated that for the Bahamian people, it does not augur well for, like you're blowing hot and cold. You come here and say you're doing this fantastic thing, but on the other hand, you're doing something which is so abysmal and so below a standard, in my view. for the Bahamian people, Speaker. On that issue, on the issue of the underwater cultural heritage, it's the treasure that's being sunken ships in our waters. I have raised this in here before, and I asked whether any licenses had been issued, and I think the Prime Minister said no. But I think at some point they're going to have to formally put that question, because I'm hearing some things, but you can't rely on what you hear. So I'd like the government to let us know what it is that they are doing in terms of the underwater cultural heritage in this country. But I want to let them know that the law was amended in 2011, which the Free National Movement Administration allowed for a division of 75% to 25%, 25% for the Bahamian people. And I don't think we supported that, because I know I did not support that. We would get 25%. So they find that they go underwater and find some huge finding. We would get 25% and they would get 75%. So I wonder if we had an international benchmarking of state take, how we would look in terms of underwater cultural heritage, because that is something we have to look at also. Yeah. No, he wasn't. He wasn't there. Oh, I think it was 75-25. I looked quickly. It was something that I found unacceptable. No, it ain't that way. No, I wouldn't object if it was like that. Speaker, and so, Mr. Speaker, it's something to look at, how because I think we all seem to be on the same page, but my point is you got to be consistent across the board. You have to be consistent. My good friend from Yamaclaw spoke about the Commercial Enterprises Act, but that's a bill I did not support, because one of our greatest resources is our human people, human beings. And so we have to ensure that if there's going to be opportunity, that it has to be measured, no prioritization of any person outside of this country over any Bahamian. I don't believe you incentivize an economy in that way with work permits. I just don't think so. Others may disagree. I don't think so. I think we got to focus on developing capacity of our people, creating good health care for our people, creating a healthy, thriving population, and building their capacity to do all things that I know that we are able to do as a people, because the Bahamian people are great. That's just the reality of it. I'm not just being xenophobic, it's just the reality. The facts show it. Look at Shanae Vivo. Did anyone talk about her incredible performance? That young woman is a powerhouse, and she is distinguishing herself in the world. Come from this little place, that beautiful poem. I think it was done the marathon, or I don't know who did the poem about the pearls in the blue ocean. That beautiful poem. That's where she comes from. We are great people. So we need not sell ourselves short, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I take my seat, I wanted to just raise an issue. I see the Minister for National Security. He's telling me I think I'm the Minister of National Security, but I don't think so. I want to raise an issue on their behalf. They've asked me to do so. These are prison officers in the 2018 squad, and they're awaiting confirmation. You may or may not know about this. They said they got letters from the 2nd of July, 2019, and they're still being viewed as trainee correctional officers after 3 years on the job. So this month would make them 3 years. And they're saying that other armed or uniformed branches have been confirmed. I don't know if that's true, that's what they're saying. And that they've not gotten theirs, and it's affecting morale at this point. And so I want to bring it to the minister's attention so that he can see whether some relief can be brought to those officers. Yeah, my cousin. Yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, I got 2 minutes, and I'll just say this, Mr. Speaker. So we support the legislation. We believe that that this any step in this type of direction is empowering. It is fulfilling the original dream, and we got to continue to fulfill that original dream. It's an onward journey, or onward movement forward to fulfill all of it that was in the heart and soul of those men who were in London in 1972, who went there from this little island. And you know what amazes me about the early Bahamas, not early, post 67 Bahamas, they found a way to make it happen, even if, you know, I'm told this is the anniversary recently, maybe a couple of days ago, of when the Americans wanted to dump nerve gas in Bahamian waters. We were a colony, and the British gave a permission for it to happen. And I have been told that when the Bahamian leadership, Progressive Party, went to the United Nations, they carried their nuclear experts and whatever it was, but they had none. But they carried some of their finest scientists or medical professionals to the United Nations, and they went and they fought with all their heart and soul for this country. And I think that is what we are all obliged to do as we continue to serve in this place. We must never allow self-interest or the fact that we look in a mirror and we see ourselves as not being able or not being equal or not being capable. And this happens a lot when we sit around the table. You know, that is why, you know, I'm only guessing now, the Oban man came with one briefcase, and he was able to go and get up in the cabinet office and get the prime minister right there. I mean, I felt bad for him. Signed someone else's signature, sign his name for someone else. And a lot of it is to do with how we view ourselves, because certain characteristics, I believe, gave them one swoop in. And then when you started looking at the history, they had a really shady or diabolical type background. I mean, the stuff that went on in the courts in America. So this is, you know, we have to ensure that we uphold the standard that was brought to us by blood, sweat, and tears. Speaker, we support this legislation and trust that this nation will go from strength to strength.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many? Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Southern Shores. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Bamboo Town.
House suspends until 3 p.m. for the luncheon break.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House suspends until the 3 p.m. hour. As many members that are in favor will remain seated, those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.